Hello, this is Brett from Survivor Samoa. I'm watching Reality Wanted, and I want you to watch Reality Wanted with me.
All right, guys, so I'm here with Brett from Survivor Samoa. Now, I have to be honest with you. I wanted you to win. Like, you were my favorite. I was so upset. I was screaming at the television.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was more sad than anything. So, like, there's that moment I have to relive. It's like that little statue just falling off. And I'm just like, no. And I remember in that moment, you know, I was like, I know I have to win this challenge. There's no other way I'm making it to the finals without that. I mean, it's pretty obvious. And so I knew the minute that fell off that I had no shot for $1 million, which, you know, for victory. But I appreciate the support.
Yes, well, I think I'm not alone there. Obviously,
My mom's on your team, so
Team Mom.
I got two.
That's right. If you could go back to Samoa, what would you do differently?
I never try to, I guess, look back at my experience and say, like, oh, what if? But if I were to look back at my experience and say, okay, well, what would be something that I would change? I would say taking a more vocal role. I operated with a pretty heavy filter with what I chose to say. I thought heavily about what I was going to say beforehand, thought about what I said to someone, how they would interpret that, and how they would use that. And then, you know, I think going back to that experience, I think being more vocal, because I was in a position of pretty decent power within my tribe, which wasn't communicated, I don't think, to the mass audience. And so just trying to be a little bit more influential and more verbal with decision making and so forth.
Right. What was the hardest thing about being out in the jungle for 39 days? Like, what's one thing we would never imagine? What was your hardest struggle out there? Physically?
The hardest physical struggle was not having food. I mean, you know, I was eating 300 to 400 calories a day, probably like a tenth of what I do normally. I mean, it was absolutely rough. I mean, for me, I think more so than most of these other people. Like, I know Jason, him and I were like sloths. We're just like disengaged, just like lying around. People are like, whoa, come on, do something. Be fun, be entertaining. And we're like, dude, give me a candy bar or a granola bar and I'll do a little dance for you. So, I mean, not having food was by far the hardest thing I could have ever imagined having to deal with.
I couldn't do it. I would absolutely crack. I'll be honest with you.
You could do it, but
I wouldn't want to.
Like, yeah.
Well, you were obviously one of the most loved out of your cast. Who was your most loved co-cast member, if you will, and your most despised?
Most loved and most despised. Can I do a co-love?
Yes.
And maybe not a co-despise. I'll do a co-love because that's fun. The people that I think grew to love the most out there was Dave, Danger Dave Ball. It's funny. It's like I remember getting there at camp. I'm like, dude, this guy. I was like, all right, we'll see what happens. And then, you know, day one, he's like, Brett, I think we got something. I'm like, all right, Dave, we'll see what happens. Then, like, a few days later, I'm like, you're my man. I was like, let's do this thing. And just a very genuine heart. Guy cracked me up. Unfortunately, most things he says are not TV appropriate. So maybe they'll do like a better edited version for like a evening audience or something.
So Dave was one of them. Dave Ball.
Dave, Kelly, and Laura. Those are my people.
I love Laura too.
Yeah, she's a sweetheart, strong-headed woman. Much respect for her. And Kelly, you know, she wasn't really, you know, I think in the spotlight at all during the season, but she's just probably one of the most genuine, kind-hearted people I've ever met. So just awesome to be able to engage with these people there. And then in terms of what's the
most despised?
Most despised. For myself, most despised. I didn't really despise anyone. I didn't fear anyone. I didn't agree with some certain people's gameplay. I didn't agree with the way Ben operated. I didn't agree with the way Russell operated on certain levels. And so, you know, I guess if you're going to say those that you despise, it would be those two.